The bullet grazed her shoulder just as she reached for the reins of her spooked mare, and Joanna Dalton refused to let out even the smallest cry of pain as she dove behind the overturned wagon. The afternoon sun blazed mercilessly over Aurora, Colorado, in the summer of 1878, casting harsh shadows across Main Street where three masked outlaws had decided to rob the bank at the worst possible moment. She pressed her hand against the wound, feeling the warm blood seep through her calico dress, and cursed her timing for being in town on this particular Tuesday. The mare had bolted halfway down the street, taking with it her supply wagon and the last of her savings tied up in fabric bolts she planned to sell to the general store. Joanna watched helplessly as her livelihood disappeared around the corner, driven by panic and gunfire. She had worked 6 months straight, sewing by candlelight until her fingers bled, to afford those bolts of fabric. The thought of asking anyone for help retrieving her horse made her jaw clench harder than the pain in her shoulder ever could. 2 more shots rang out, and she heard the sheriff shouting orders to deputies somewhere down the street. The wooden wagon provided decent cover, but she knew she needed to move soon. Her shoulder throbbed with increasing intensity, and she could feel the blood loss making her lightheaded. Still, Joanna gritted her teeth and began crawling along the storefront, determined to make it to safety on her own terms. That was when she heard boots hitting the dusty ground beside her, and a strong hand gripped her uninjured arm. "Madam, you are bleeding pretty bad. We need to get you to Doc Harrison." Joanna jerked her arm away and glared up at the man crouching beside her. He was tall, even in his crouch, with dark hair the color of coffee grounds and eyes that struck her as an unusual shade of amber in the bright sunlight. A worn Stetson sat on his head, and a deputy badge gleamed on his leather vest. She had seen him around town a few times since he arrived 3 weeks ago from somewhere back east. "I am fine," she said through clenched teeth. "Go help the sheriff." "The sheriff has 4 other deputies handling those idiots. You have a bullet wound that needs tending." His voice carried authority but also concern, which somehow irritated her more than if he had just ordered her around. Another bullet shattered the window above them, raining glass down on their heads. The deputy moved without hesitation, covering her body with his own as the shards fell around them. When the immediate danger passed, he pulled back slightly but kept one hand protectively on her back. "My name is Isaac Young, and I am going to help you whether you like it or not," he said firmly. "You can argue with me after we get you somewhere safe." "I did not ask for your help, Deputy Young," Joanna shot back, but her vision swam slightly as she spoke. Isaac noticed her pallor and made a decision. Before she could protest, he swept her up into his arms and began running in a low crouch toward the nearest alley. Joanna wanted to fight, wanted to demand he put her down immediately, but her body betrayed her with a wave of dizziness that forced her to grip his shirt just to keep the world from spinning. He carried her 3 blocks away from the gunfight, moving with surprising speed and agility for a man his size. When they reached Doc Harrison's office, Isaac kicked the door open and carried her straight to the examination table. The elderly doctor looked up from organizing his medicine bottles and immediately sprang into action. "Deputy, what happened?" Doc Harrison asked, already reaching for clean cloth and his medical bag. "Caught a bullet in the bank robbery." "Looks like it went through, but she has lost some blood," Isaac reported, finally setting Joanna down gently on the table. "I can speak for myself," Joanna protested weakly, though she had to admit lying down felt considerably better than being upright. "And it barely touched me." Doc Harrison cut away the sleeve of her dress with practiced efficiency, revealing the wound. "Young lady, you are lucky it went clean through, but this is going to need proper cleaning and stitching. Deputy, I will need you to hold her steady." "That will not be necessary," Joanna insisted, but Isaac had already positioned himself at her side, his large hands ready to keep her from moving. The next 20 minutes tested every ounce of Joanna's considerable stubbornness. Doc Harrison worked methodically, cleaning the wound with whiskey that burned worse than the bullet itself had. She bit down on a leather strap and refused to cry out, but her hands clenched into fists so tight her nails drew blood from her palms. Isaac held her firmly but gently, and she hated that his presence actually provided some comfort during the ordeal. When Doc Harrison finally finished stitching and bandaging her shoulder, Joanna sat up slowly, pushing Isaac's helpful hand away. "Thank you, Doctor. What do I owe you?" $3 should cover it," Doc Harrison said, washing his hands in a basin. Joanna's face fell. $3 was exactly what she had in her pocket, meant for supplies to last her the rest of the month. But she reached into her skirt pocket without hesitation and counted out the coins. Isaac watched this exchange with growing understanding. "Miss Dalton, you have someone who can help you for the next few days. You should not be using that arm much while it heals." "I will manage just fine on my own, as I always have," she replied stiffly, sliding off the examination table. The quick movement made her sway slightly, and Isaac steadied her with a hand on her good arm. "Where do you live?" he asked. "I will take you home." "That is not necessary." "Miss Dalton, you just lost a fair amount of blood, you can barely stand up straight, and there are still outlaws potentially at large in town. I am taking you home, and you can complain about it the entire way if you like." Something in his tone brooked no argument, or perhaps Joanna simply lacked the energy to fight anymore. She gave him her address, a small homestead 2 miles outside of town, and reluctantly accepted his arm as they walked outside. Her wagon and mare were nowhere to be seen. Joanna felt her heart sink as she scanned the street. Those fabric bolts represented months of work, and without them, she had no income for the foreseeable future. She had no family to fall back on, no savings left after buying the fabric wholesale, and now a $3 debt that left her with exactly nothing. Isaac seemed to read her thoughts. "I will put word out about your horse and wagon. Someone probably caught them after they bolted. And if no one did, then we will deal with that when the time comes." He guided her toward his own horse, a sturdy bay gelding tied up outside the doctor's office. "Can you ride?" "Of course I can ride," Joanna said indignantly, though she eyed the horse with some trepidation given her current state. Isaac mounted first, then reached down to help her up. Joanna ignored his hand and tried to pull herself up using the saddle horn with her good arm. Pain immediately shot through her injured shoulder, and she gasped despite herself. Before she could make a second attempt, Isaac leaned down and lifted her up in front of him as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. "Your stubbornness is going to tear those stitches," he said, settling her against his chest and taking up the reins. Joanna wanted to argue but found herself too exhausted and in too much pain. She sat rigidly at first, trying to maintain distance between them, but as Isaac guided the horse into an easy walk, she gradually relaxed against him. His solid warmth at her back felt oddly reassuring, though she would never admit it aloud. The ride to her homestead took nearly 40 minutes at the gentle pace Isaac maintained. As they rode, he told her about himself without her asking. He had been a ranch hand in Kansas before deciding to try law enforcement, had 2 older sisters who wrote him letters every week that he never answered as promptly as he should, and had a particular fondness for apple pie that no one in Aurora seemed to bake quite right. Joanna listened despite herself, occasionally offering short responses when pressed. She told him she had come to Colorado 3 years ago after her parents died, that she made her living as a seamstress, and that she preferred her own company to most people's. "I noticed that," Isaac said with what sounded like amusement. When they reached her small cabin, Isaac took in the property with an assessing eye. The structure itself was sound enough, but the fencing needed repair, the roof had a few shingles missing, and the small barn looked like it might collapse in a strong wind. Joanna had done her best to maintain everything, but some jobs required strength and skills she simply did not possess. He helped her down from the horse and walked her to the door. Joanna fumbled for her key with her left hand, awkward and slow. Isaac waited patiently, not offering to help this time, seeming to understand she needed to do this herself. Inside, the cabin was modest but clean. A sewing table dominated one corner, covered with half-finished garments and spools of thread in various colors. A small kitchen occupied another corner, and a bed with a handmade quilt stood against the far wall. Everything was neat and orderly, speaking to a woman who took pride in her space despite having little. "Thank you for bringing me home, Deputy Young," Joanna said formally, turning to face him. "You have been very kind, but I can manage from here." Isaac looked at her injured shoulder, then at the water bucket sitting empty by the stove, then at the woodpile outside that would need splitting soon. "Miss Dalton, I know you can manage. I have no doubt about that. But just because you can do something alone does not mean you should have to. I have been taking care of myself for 3 years now. I believe you. That does not mean I am going to walk away and leave you here without water or firewood when you are injured." He held up a hand when she opened her mouth to protest. "I am not asking your permission. I am filling your water bucket and splitting enough wood to last you a few days. You can stand there and glare at me the whole time if it makes you feel better." Before Joanna could respond, he picked up her bucket and headed back outside toward her well. She stood in the doorway, frustration warring with relief and something else she could not quite name. Men in her experience always wanted something in return for their help. Her father had been a good man but overbearing, making every decision for her and her mother without consideration for their opinions. The few suitors who had shown interest back east had expected her to be grateful for their attention, as if marriage to any man was better than independence. But Isaac Young did not seem to expect anything. He simply filled her bucket, carried it back inside, then went to split wood without fanfare or expectation of praise. Joanna watched him through the window, noting the efficient way he worked, the strength in his shoulders as the axe came down. He had removed his vest and rolled up his sleeves, and she found herself noticing details she had no business noticing about a man she had just met. When he finished, he stacked the wood neatly by her door and returned inside. "You have food for the next few days." "I have beans and cornmeal," Joanna said. It was not much, but it would keep her fed. "I will bring some supplies tomorrow when I check on your stitches. Doc Harrison can check my stitches. Doc Harrison lives in town. I live half a mile down the road." Isaac picked up his hat from where he had set it on her table. "Besides, I am going to find your horse and wagon. Someone in town must have seen where they ended up." Joanna felt tears prick her eyes unexpectedly, and she turned away so he would not see. "Why are you doing this?" Isaac was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was gentle. "Because you need help and I am able to give it. That is reason enough." After he left, Joanna sank down onto her bed and finally let herself cry. Not from pain, though her shoulder throbbed mercifully, but from the overwhelming frustration of being vulnerable. She had built her entire life around never needing anyone, never being beholden to anyone, never giving anyone power over her. And now this infuriating deputy had swooped in and helped her whether she wanted it or not. The worst part was how much she had needed that help. Without Isaac, She might have bled out behind that wagon. Without his horse, she would have had to walk 2 miles home injured. Without his wood splitting, she would have struggled to cook or keep warm when the mountain nights grew cold. She woke the next morning to the sound of hammering. Joanna sat up too quickly and immediately regretted it as pain lanced through her shoulder. She made her way to the window and stared in disbelief at the sight before her. Isaac Young was repairing her fence. He had clearly been at it for a while, judging by the amount of work already completed. Her previously sagging fence posts now stood straight and secure, and he was currently nailing new rails into place with steady, practiced movements. Joanna marched outside, or would have marched if her injury allowed for such dignity. Instead, she walked stiffly down from her porch. "Deputy Young, what do you think you are doing?" He looked up and actually smiled at her. "Morning, Miss Dalton. I hope I did not wake you. I tried to be quiet. You are fixing my fence." "Yes, I noticed yesterday it needed some work. I had time this morning before my shift, so I figured I would take care of it." He drove another nail home with 3 efficient strikes. "I did not ask you to do that." "I know." He moved to the next section of fence. Joanna stood there feeling helpless and angry and confused all at once. "Why?" Isaac set down his hammer and turned to face her fully. "Miss Dalton, I get the sense that something in your past made you believe accepting help makes you weak or puts you in debt to people. I want to be clear about something. I am not keeping score. I am not expecting anything in return. I am not trying to prove you cannot manage on your own. I am simply doing what neighbors should do for each other. We are not neighbors. I have been here 3 years and never even seen you before 3 weeks ago. Well, now we are neighbors and we have seen each other." He picked up his hammer again. "I brought eggs and bacon for breakfast. They are in that basket by your door. Make sure you eat something before you take the laudanum Doc Harrison probably gave you for pain." He went back to work, clearly considering the conversation finished. Joanna returned to her cabin feeling thoroughly off balance. The basket did indeed contain eggs, bacon, fresh bread, and even a small jar of jam. It was more food than she had eaten in a week. She cooked breakfast slowly, awkward with one arm, and found herself making enough for 2 people. When she brought a plate out to Isaac, he looked surprised but pleased. "Thank you, Miss Dalton. That is very kind." They ate together in silence, sitting on her porch steps. The morning sun warmed the air but had not yet reached its punishing midday intensity. Birds sang in the cottonwood tree near her well, and in the distance, mountains rose purple and majestic against the blue sky. "Your stitches look good," Isaac observed, noting the clean bandage she had managed to change that morning. "Any fever?" "No, I am healing fine." "Good." He finished his eggs and set the plate aside. "I found your horse and wagon." Joanna's head snapped up. "You did? Where?" "Fletcher's livery. The mare ran there and Fletcher brought in your wagon. Everything is still there, all your fabric bolts intact." Relief flooded through her so intensely she felt dizzy. "Thank God. I need to go get them." "Already arranged. Fletcher is going to bring them by this afternoon. I told him you were injured and could not come to town." Isaac stood and collected their plates. "I should finish this fence and head to work. I will stop by tomorrow to check on you." "You do not need to do that." "I know. I am going to anyway." He carried the plates to her door, handed them to her, then tipped his hat. "Good day, Miss Dalton." Over the next week, Isaac appeared at her homestead every single day. He brought food, checked her wound, and tackled various repairs around her property. He fixed her barn door, patched her roof, and even rehung her cabin door so it no longer stuck in the frame. Each time Joanna protested, he gave her the same answer. He had time and he wanted to help. She began to look forward to his visits despite herself. Isaac had an easy way about him, never pushing too hard, never demanding anything from her. He talked about his day at the sheriff's office, asked about her sewing work, and listened with genuine interest when she described the dress she was making for the banker's wife. On the 8th day, Joanna's shoulder had healed enough that she could use her arm again with minimal pain. When Isaac arrived that afternoon, she had made a full dinner of roasted chicken, potatoes, and vegetables from her garden. "This is a feast," Isaac said appreciatively, taking in the spread on her small table. "What is the occasion? You have helped me considerably this past week." "The least I can do is feed you a decent meal." Joanna served him a generous portion, aware of how much work he had been doing. They ate together, and for the first time the conversation flowed naturally. Joanna found herself telling him about her childhood in Pennsylvania, how her father had run a dry goods store and taught her to spot quality fabric. She spoke of her mother's death when she was 16, how her father had grown increasingly controlling afterward, trying to arrange a marriage for her to a man 20 years her senior who owned the neighboring store. "I could not do it," she said quietly. "Everyone said I was being foolish, that I should be grateful for such a good match. But I wanted to make my own choices, live my own life. When my father died 2 years later, I sold everything and came west. I thought if I could be completely independent, never need anyone, then no one could control me or force me into a life I did not choose." Isaac listened without interruption, his amber eyes thoughtful. When she finished, he said, "That makes sense. But Joanna, there is a difference between being controlled and accepting help freely given." It was the first time he had used her given name, and it sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. "I know that now," she admitted. "I think I have known it all week, watching you help me without expecting anything in return. I just do not know how to stop being so defensive about it. You will figure it out. You are one of the strongest people I have met." Isaac reached across the table and took her hand gently. "And for what it is worth, I think you made the right choice coming here and building your own life." Joanna looked down at their joined hands, his rough and calloused from work, hers marked with needle pricks and thread stains. "Why have you been so kind to me, Isaac?" He was quiet for a moment, then said honestly, "At first, because you needed help and I could provide it. But now, because I find myself thinking about you constantly. Because your strength and independence attract me more than any quality I have ever encountered in another person. Because when I am fixing your fence or bringing you food, it gives me an excuse to see you, and seeing you has become the best part of my day." Her breath caught. "Isaac, I do not know if I can be what you want. I'm not good at depending on people. I do not know how to be soft or yielding or any of the things women are supposed to be. I do not want you to be anything other than exactly who you are." He stood and moved around the table, kneeling beside her chair so they were at eye level. "I am not asking you to need me, Joanna. I am just asking if maybe you could want me to be around anyway." She studied his face, seeing nothing but sincerity and hope. Almost without thinking, she reached out and touched his cheek, feeling the rough stubble there. "I do want that. It terrifies me, but I do." Isaac turned his head and kissed her palm gently. "We can go as slow as you need." "I think I have been going slow my whole life, being careful and guarded," Joanna said softly. "Maybe it is time I took a risk." She leaned forward and kissed him, tentative at first, then with growing certainty as he responded. His hand came up to cradle the back of her head, careful of her healing shoulder, and the kiss deepened into something that made her heart race. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Isaac smiled. "That was worth waiting for." Joanna laughed, surprising herself. "Stay for coffee, I would like that very much." They moved to her porch as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Isaac sat on the steps while Joanna settled into her rocking chair, and they talked until the stars came out. He told her about his childhood in Kansas, about learning to ride before he could walk, about the sister who had raised him after their mother died. She told him about learning to sew, about her dreams of opening her own dress shop someday, about the loneliness she rarely admitted to feeling. When he finally stood to leave, Isaac took both her hands in his. "May I call on you properly? Take you to dinner in town, maybe go riding together?" "Yes," Joanna said, without any of her usual hesitation. "I would like that." Over the following weeks, their courtship unfolded in a way that felt both natural and inevitable. Isaac took her to dinner at Aurora's small restaurant, where the food was mediocre but the company was perfect. They went riding together in the foothills, and Joanna discovered that Isaac knew the names of every wildflower and could identify bird calls with impressive accuracy. She also began letting him help her with larger projects without argument. When she needed to deliver a particularly heavy wedding dress to a client in town, she accepted his offer to drive her. When her well pump broke, she sent word to him before attempting to fix it herself. Each time she allowed him to assist, it felt less like weakness and more like partnership. Isaac, for his part, seemed to understand that winning Joanna's trust was an ongoing process. He never pushed too hard, never took her growing openness for granted. He asked her opinion on everything, from what color he should paint his own cabin to whether he should accept the sheriff's offer to become head deputy. "That is wonderful," Joanna said when he told her about the promotion. "You should absolutely accept. It would mean more responsibility, longer hours sometimes," Isaac said. They were sitting by her fireplace on a cool October evening, 2 months after they met. "I want to make sure that is something you would be comfortable with. Isaac, it is your career. You should not turn down opportunities because of me. But you are a factor in my decisions now. I want you to be." He pulled her closer against his side on the small sofa. "Everything I do, I think about how it affects us." "Us," Joanna repeated softly, testing the word. "I like the sound of that. Good, because I have been thinking." Isaac shifted so he could look at her directly. "I know we have not been courting very long, but I am 32 years old, and I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. I am not a man who believes in long, drawn-out engagements when I know what I want." Joanna's heart began beating faster. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I love you, Joanna Dalton. I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you challenge me. I love that you argue with me when you think I am wrong, and that you have learned to let me help you without seeing it as weakness. I love watching you sew and listening to you talk about your plans for the future." He took her hands in his. "I want to be part of that future. I want to build a life with you as partners in every sense of the word. Will you marry me?" Tears spilled down Joanna's cheeks before she could stop them. "I love you too. I think I have since that first day, even though I was too stubborn to admit it. You saw past all my defenses and just kept showing up, kept being kind, kept proving that accepting help does not mean losing myself." She laughed through her tears. "Yes, Isaac Young, I will marry you." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Joanna felt every remaining wall around her heart crumble. When they finally broke apart, both grinning like fools, Isaac said, "How do you feel about a December wedding? I know it is soon, but I have already wasted 32 years not being married to you. December sounds perfect." They were married on a snowy afternoon just before Christmas, in Aurora's small church with half the town in attendance. Joanna wore a dress she had made herself, ivory silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Isaac looked handsome in a new suit, his amber eyes bright with joy as he watched her walk down the aisle. The sheriff, who had become a good friend to both of them, performed the ceremony. When Isaac slipped the simple gold band onto Joanna's finger, she felt a sense of rightness she had never experienced before. This was not losing her independence or surrendering to someone else's control. This was choosing to share her life with someone who respected and valued her exactly as she was. At the reception, held in the restaurant they had gone to on their first official date, Isaac pulled her onto the small dance floor. Joanna went willingly, no longer fighting every gesture of care or affection. "Happy, Mrs. Young?" he asked, holding her close as they swayed to the music. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she admitted, "though I reserve the right to still be stubborn about some things." Isaac laughed, the sound rumbling in his chest. "I would not have you any other way." They spent their wedding night in Isaac's cabin, which was larger and better maintained than Joanna's. He had been working to combine their households, moving her sewing equipment and personal belongings gradually over the past few weeks. Joanna appreciated that he consulted her on every decision, from where to place her sewing table to what color curtains they should hang. Their physical union that night was tender and passionate by turns, Isaac taking his time to learn what pleased her, Joanna discovering that vulnerability with someone you trusted could be its own kind of strength. Afterward, lying wrapped in his arms, she felt a contentment she had never thought she would experience. "I was so afraid of this," she whispered into the darkness, "of belonging to someone. You do not belong to me, Joanna. You belong with me. There is a difference." Isaac kissed her forehead. "We belong with each other." The first year of their marriage brought adjustments and compromises, but also deep joy. Joanna continued her sewing business, which actually grew as more women in Aurora learned about her skill. Isaac thrived in his new role as head deputy, earning respect throughout the county for his fairness and dedication. They learned each other's habits and quirks. Isaac discovered that Joanna needed quiet time alone to recharge and made sure to give her space when she needed it. Joanna learned that Isaac expressed love through acts of service and allowed him to fix things and help her without resistance. One evening in early autumn of their second year of marriage, Joanna waited nervously for Isaac to come home from work. She had news to share, news that both excited and terrified her. When he walked through the door, she met him with unusual urgency. "I need to tell you something," she said without preamble. Isaac immediately looked concerned. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong exactly. I am just not sure how you will feel about it." She took a deep breath. "I am going to have a baby, Isaac. Doc Harrison confirmed it this afternoon." The expression that crossed Isaac's face was pure wonder. "A baby? We are going to have a baby?" "Yes. Around March, he thinks." Isaac let out a whoop of joy and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. When he set her down, his hands framed her face gently. "This is the best news. Why did you think I would not be happy?" "Because we have not talked much about children." "Because I do not know if I will be a good mother. Because I am terrified of losing the independence I have worked so hard to maintain." The fears tumbled out in a rush. "Joanna, listen to me." Isaac's voice was firm but loving. "You are going to be an amazing mother. And having a child does not mean losing yourself. We will figure this out together, just like we figure out everything else. I will be here, helping with midnight feedings and diaper changes and whatever else babies require. You are not doing this alone." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "How do you always know exactly what I need to hear?" "Because I love you and I pay attention." He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "This is wonderful, Joanna. Thank you for giving me this gift." The pregnancy was difficult at times, particularly in the early months when morning sickness left Joanna weak and miserable. True to his word, Isaac adjusted his schedule to be home more, taking care of cooking and cleaning without complaint. When Joanna fretted about falling behind on her sewing orders, he helped her set up a system where she could work while resting, propping up pillows and bringing her tea. As her body changed and her belly swelled, Joanna struggled with feeling ungainly and awkward. Isaac never failed to tell her how beautiful she looked, but more importantly, he continued to treat her as a capable partner rather than a fragile invalid. On a cold March night in 1881, Joanna went into labor. Doc Harrison attended the birth, along with 2 local women who served as midwives. Isaac stayed by her side throughout, holding her hand and offering encouragement even when she cursed him for doing this to her. After 12 hours of labor, their son was born just as dawn broke. He came into the world screaming lustily, with a full head of dark hair and his father's amber eyes. "A boy," Doc Harrison announced, placing the cleaned and wrapped baby in Joanna's arms. "Strong and healthy." Joanna looked down at her son and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. Isaac leaned over her shoulder, one arm around her, one finger touching their son's tiny hand. The baby immediately gripped it with surprising strength. "Hello there, little one," Isaac said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "Welcome to the world. What should we name him?" Joanna asked, unable to take her eyes off their son. They had discussed names during the pregnancy but never settled on anything definite. Now, looking at this perfect tiny person, Isaac said, "What about Samuel?" "After your grandfather, Samuel Young," Joanna tested the name. "I like that." "Samuel Isaac Young. Perfect." Isaac kissed her temple. "You did amazing, Joanna. I am so proud of you." Adjusting to life with a newborn tested them in ways Joanna had not anticipated. Samuel was a demanding baby, crying frequently and sleeping in short bursts. Joanna, who had always prided herself on her competence, felt overwhelmed and incompetent for the first time in years. 2 weeks after Samuel's birth, she broke down crying while trying to soothe the screaming baby at 3 in the morning. Isaac found her in the rocking chair, both of them in tears. "I cannot do this," she sobbed. "I am terrible at this. He just cries and I do not know what he needs." Isaac gently took Samuel from her arms and began walking with him, bouncing slightly. "You are not terrible at this. You are exhausted." "When did you last sleep more than an hour at a time?" "I do not know." "Days ago." "Right. Here is what is going to happen. I am going to take care of Samuel. You are going to go to bed and sleep as long as you can. Do not argue with me." He said the last part firmly when she opened her mouth to protest. "But he needs to eat soon. Then I will wake you when he needs to eat, and you will go right back to sleep afterward." Isaac kissed her forehead. "Let me help you, Joanna. That is what partners do." Too exhausted to argue, Joanna went to bed and slept for 5 blissful hours while Isaac managed their son. When she woke, feeling more human than she had in weeks, she found Isaac in the kitchen making breakfast one-handed while holding a content Samuel in his other arm. "You are a miracle worker," she said, moving to stand beside him. "Not really. He just needed a change of scenery and someone who was not as tired." Isaac smiled at her. "But I do think we need to figure out a better system. Maybe we can take shifts, or I can hire Mrs. Patterson to come help during the day sometimes." "I hate needing help with this." "I know you do. But Joanna, needing help with a newborn is not weakness. It is just reality. Nobody does this perfectly alone, and nobody expects you to." Gradually, they found their rhythm as parents. Isaac took the evening shift with Samuel so Joanna could sleep early, and she handled the dawn feeding so he could rest before work. Mrs. Patterson came by 3 days a week to help with housework, giving Joanna time to rest or work on sewing projects. As Samuel grew from a demanding newborn into a curious infant, Joanna discovered that she actually enjoyed motherhood more than she had expected. She loved watching her son discover his hands, loved the way his face lit up when he saw her or Isaac. She even managed to start sewing again, working during Samuel's naps and sometimes with him in a basket beside her table. By Samuel's first birthday, life had settled into a comfortable pattern. Isaac had been promoted to sheriff after the previous one retired, a position that came with more responsibility but also better pay. They were able to add a room onto their cabin, creating a proper bedroom for Samuel and freeing up space for Joanna's growing sewing business. One evening, after putting Samuel to bed, they sat together on their porch watching the sunset. Isaac had his arm around Joanna and she leaned into his warmth contentedly. "Do you ever regret it?" Isaac asked suddenly. "Regret what?" "Marrying me, having Samuel." "Giving up some of your independence." Joanna turned to look at him, surprised. "Why would you think I regret any of that?" "Because I know how important your independence was to you. I know you fought hard for it." "Sometimes I worry that I pushed too hard, that I convinced you to give up something fundamental to who you are." She took his face in her hands, making sure he was looking at her. "Isaac Young, you listen to me. I have not given up my independence. I have chosen to share my life with you and our son, and that is completely different. I can still make my own choices, run my own business, have my own opinions. The only difference now is that I have people I love who support me and whom I support in return." She kissed him softly. "I have never regretted a single moment with you. You taught me that accepting help and allowing myself to need someone does not make me weak. It makes me human." "I love you so much," Isaac said, pulling her close. "I love you too, even though you are still infuriatingly helpful all the time." He laughed. "I cannot help it. It is how I show love. I know, and I have learned to let you, which is a miracle in itself." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge. In the distance, coyotes called to each other and the night insects sang their chorus. Inside, Samuel slept peacefully in his crib, unaware of how loved he was. The years passed in a blur of joy and challenges. Samuel grew into a bright, energetic boy with his father's coloring and his mother's stubborn streak. They had a second child, a daughter they named Rose, when Samuel was 3. Rose was an easier baby than her brother had been, content and smiley, though she developed her own strong will as she grew. Joanna's sewing business thrived to the point where she had to hire 2 women from town to help with orders. Isaac continued as sheriff, earning a reputation as one of the fairest and most effective lawmen in Colorado. Their home was filled with laughter and love, occasionally punctuated by the normal arguments and frustrations of any marriage, but always grounded in deep respect and affection. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Isaac arranged for Mrs. Patterson to watch Samuel and Rose overnight so he could take Joanna to Denver for a special dinner. They stayed in a nice hotel, ate at a fancy restaurant, and took a walk through the city in the evening. "This is lovely," Joanna said, holding Isaac's arm as they strolled past shop windows. "But you did not need to go to all this trouble." "Yes, I did. You have been so busy with the children and your business that I wanted to remind you that you are still my priority, that we are still a priority." He stopped and turned to face her. "These 10 years have been the best of my life, Joanna. Thank you for taking a chance on that stubborn cowboy who would not take no for an answer. Thank you for not giving up on that stubborn woman who did not know how to accept help." She smiled up at him. "Though I've gotten much better at it over the years." "You have. Though you still try to move furniture by yourself when you think I am not watching." "Old habits are hard to break," she admitted with a laugh. They returned to Aurora the next day, refreshed and reconnected. Samuel and Rose launched themselves at their parents with enthusiastic hugs. talking over each other to describe everything that had happened in their absence. As Joanna listened to her children and felt Isaac's hand warm in hers, she marveled at how different her life was from what she had imagined when she first came to Colorado. She had thought independence meant doing everything alone, never relying on anyone, building walls to keep people out. Isaac had shown her that true strength came from knowing when to ask for help, from building partnerships based on mutual respect, from allowing yourself to be vulnerable with someone trustworthy. As the children grew older, Joanna and Isaac faced new challenges. Samuel, at 12, announced he wanted to be a sheriff like his father, which both pleased and worried Joanna. Rose, at 9, showed an aptitude for sewing and spent hours at Joanna's side learning the craft. They navigated childhood illnesses, school troubles, and the normal dramas of family life. Through it all, Isaac remained her steadfast partner. He still helped without being asked, though now Joanna asked more often. She had learned that requesting assistance was not weakness but wisdom, that partnership meant sharing both burdens and joys. One autumn evening, when Samuel was 15 and Rose was 12, the family gathered for dinner as they did every night. Samuel was talking about his plans to become a deputy after he turned 18, while Rose described a dress she wanted to make for the upcoming harvest dance. Joanna watched her family, her heart full. Isaac caught her eye across the table and smiled, the expression warm and knowing. He reached over and squeezed her hand, a silent acknowledgement of everything they had built together. After the children went to bed, Joanna and Isaac sat on their porch as they had countless times before. The mountains stood dark against the star-filled sky, and the air carried the crisp promise of coming winter. "You remember the first time we sat out here together?" Isaac asked. "The night you proposed, I was so terrified and so hopeful all at once. I knew even then that marrying you would be the best decision of my life." He pulled her closer. "I was right. We have done well, haven't we?" Joanna said softly. "Built a good life, raised good children." "We have done more than well. We have built something extraordinary." Isaac kissed the top of her head. "And we are nowhere near done yet." When Samuel turned 18, he did indeed become a deputy under his father's guidance. The pride on Isaac's face when he pinned the badge on his son brought tears to Joanna's eyes. Rose, at 15, had taken over much of the day-to-day operation of the sewing business, showing a head for numbers and design that Joanna had never possessed. As the children became adults and began their own lives, Joanna found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She thought about that young woman who had come to Colorado so determined to need no one, to prove she could survive completely alone. She had been strong then, certainly, but it was a brittle kind of strength born from fear and pain. Now, at 48 years old, she understood that real strength came from building connections, from allowing yourself to love and be loved, from accepting that humans were meant to live in community rather than isolation. Isaac had taught her that, not through words but through consistent, patient action. One Sunday afternoon, Samuel brought home a young woman he was courting, a school teacher named Ellen. Over dinner, Joanna watched the way Samuel looked at Ellen, the careful attention he paid to her needs and opinions, the respect evident in every interaction. She saw Isaac in their son and felt proud that they had raised a man who understood partnership. After Samuel and Ellen left, Joanna said to Isaac, "He learned from you, how to treat a woman as an equal partner." "He learned from both of us," Isaac corrected. "From watching us work together, respect each other, support each other." "I suppose that is true." She leaned against him on the sofa. "We have been a good example. The best." Samuel and Ellen married the following year in a ceremony that reminded Joanna poignantly of her own wedding. Rose served as Ellen's attendant, and Isaac stood proudly beside his son. As they exchanged vows, Joanna felt the circle of life continuing, the lessons of love and partnership passing to the next generation. Rose eventually fell in love with a young man named David who worked at the bank. He was quiet and thoughtful, perfectly complementing Rose's more outgoing nature. Their courtship was gentle and sweet, and when David asked Isaac for permission to propose, Isaac gave his blessing readily. "Another wedding to plan," Joanna said to Isaac after David and Rose announced their engagement. "Our children are all grown up. They are. Which means we get to focus on just being us again." Isaac pulled her into his arms. "I have been looking forward to this, honestly. I love our children, but I have missed having you all to myself sometimes." "Selfish man," she teased. "When it comes to you, absolutely." After Rose's wedding, with both children settled in their own homes and lives, Joanna and Isaac entered a new phase. The house felt quiet without the constant activity of children, but it was a comfortable quiet. They took long rides together, something they had not had time for in years. Isaac finally convinced Joanna to take a trip to San Francisco, something he had wanted to do for decades. They traveled by train, marveling at how much the world had changed since they were young. In San Francisco, they walked along the waterfront, ate at restaurants serving food from around the world, and acted like young lovers despite being in their 50s. "This is wonderful," Joanna said as they watched the sun set over the Pacific Ocean. "Thank you for insisting we do this." "See what happens when you let me help plan things," Isaac said with a grin. She swatted his arm playfully. "I have been letting you help plan things for over 20 years now. I know. I am very proud of how far you have come. From the stubborn woman who refused to admit she needed help. You were never stubborn about needing help. You were stubborn about deserving help." Isaac turned serious. "That first day, behind that wagon when you were bleeding and still trying to wave me off, it broke my heart. You were so convinced that asking for help made you weak or unworthy. I thought I had to earn kindness, earn consideration. My father always made everything conditional." Joanna took Isaac's hand. "You showed me that love does not work that way. That I deserved help and kindness and care simply because I was a person who needed it, not because I had earned it somehow." "Everyone deserves those things," Isaac said firmly. "I am just glad I got to be the one to show you." They returned to Aurora refreshed and closer than ever. Isaac, now in his 60s, decided it was time to retire as sheriff. He recommended his son Samuel as his replacement, and the town council agreed unanimously. The transition went smoothly, and Isaac found he enjoyed the slower pace of retirement. He spent his days helping Joanna with her business, which she had scaled back but still maintained. They worked side by side, Isaac doing the heavy lifting and cutting while Joanna did the detailed stitching. Customers often remarked on how lovely it was to see a couple so clearly in love after so many years together. Samuel and Ellen had 3 children, and Rose and David had 2, giving Joanna and Isaac 5 grandchildren to dote on. The house that had seemed too quiet filled with noise and laughter again, whenever the grandchildren visited. Isaac built a swing in the old cottonwood tree, and Joanna taught her granddaughters to sew while her grandsons followed their grandfather around the property, learning to fix fences and split wood. One evening, watching Isaac show their oldest grandson how to properly stack firewood, Joanna reflected on how beautifully life had turned out. That stubborn, scared woman who had arrived in Colorado all those years ago could never have imagined this. A full life, a loving family, a partnership that had weathered decades and only grown stronger. Isaac caught her watching and walked over, leaving their grandson to finish the task. What are you thinking about? Just how lucky I am, how lucky we are, not luck, choice. Isaac sat beside her on the porch steps. You chose to let me in. You chose to trust me. You chose to build this life with me. Those were all conscious decisions, not luck. You chose to be patient with me, to keep showing up even when I pushed you away. Those were choices too. Best choices I ever made. He kissed her softly, and I would make them all again in a heartbeat. As the sun set on another day, painting the Colorado sky in brilliant colors, Joanna leaned against Isaac's shoulder and felt profound contentment. She had learned so much over the years. That strength could be gentle, that independence did not mean isolation, that accepting help was not weakness but wisdom. Most importantly, she had learned that love, real love, did not diminish you. It expanded you, made you more fully yourself, gave you the courage to be vulnerable and the security to take risks. Isaac had shown her that, taught her that, lived that truth every single day of their life together. I love you, she said softly. I love you too, Isaac replied, his arm tightening around her. Always have, always will. In the distance, their grandchildren's laughter rang out clear and bright, the sound of family, of legacy, of love continuing forward into the future. It was a future Joanna had never thought she would have, a future she had been too stubborn and too scared to even want, until a cowboy with amber eyes and patient hands had helped her anyway, asking nothing in return but the chance to stand beside her. And in helping her, he had won her stubborn heart completely. Years continued to pass gently. Isaac and Joanna grew old together, their hair turning silver, their steps slowing but their love never diminishing. They celebrated their 40th anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The party was held in their home, the same cabin they had shared for decades, though it had been expanded and improved many times over the years. As speeches were made and toasts offered, Samuel stood and raised his glass. To my parents, who showed me what real partnership looks like. Dad, you taught me that helping someone is not about proving they need you, but about showing you care. Mom, you taught me that accepting help is not weakness but wisdom. Together, you taught me what love really means. Joanna wiped tears from her eyes as their family applauded. Isaac squeezed her hand under the table, and she looked at him to find him watching her with the same warm expression he had worn since the day they met. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and they were alone again, they sat on their porch one more time. The mountains stood eternal in the distance, the stars wheeled overhead, and the night air carried familiar scents of sage and pine. 40 years, Joanna said wonderingly. It has gone so fast. And yet I remember every moment, Isaac replied. Every stubborn argument, every compromise, every laugh, every tear, all of it precious. You think we did it right, raised good children, built a good life. I think we did our best, and our best was pretty remarkable. Isaac shifted to look at her directly. Joanna, you transformed from a woman so determined to need nothing from anyone into someone who built a whole community around her. You taught your children, your grandchildren, everyone who knows you, that asking for help is not defeat, that we are stronger together than apart. I had a good teacher, she said softly, and I had the privilege of loving the most extraordinary woman I have ever known. He kissed her hand gently. Thank you for letting that stubborn cowboy into your heart all those years ago. Thank you for not taking no for an answer when I was too proud to accept what I needed. They sat together in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, hearts beating in rhythm after 40 years of practice. The stubborn woman and the patient cowboy who had refused to give up on her, who had helped her even when she could not ask, who had won her heart through simple, consistent kindness. As the night deepened around them, Joanna thought about that day so long ago when a bullet had grazed her shoulder and a stranger had swept her up to safety. She had been so angry, so determined not to need anyone. If she could go back and tell that younger version of herself what was coming, she would say this: let him help you. Trust him. Choose him. Because the life you will build together will be more beautiful than anything you could create alone. But she did not need to go back. She had made those choices, lived that life, loved that man. And sitting here on the porch of the home they had built together, surrounded by the legacy of their love, she knew with certainty that every stubborn moment of resistance had been worth it for every moment of surrender that followed. Isaac Young had helped her when she refused to ask. In doing so, he had won not just her heart, but her trust, her respect, her partnership. Together, they had proven that love did not require one person to be weak and the other strong, but rather that real strength came from standing together, supporting each other, building something that neither could have created alone. As they finally stood to go inside, walking slowly with the stiffness of age but hand in hand as always, Joanna felt nothing but gratitude. For this man, for this life, for every moment that had led them here. The door closed behind them, shutting out the Colorado night. Two hearts still beating as one after 40 years of love, partnership, and the kind of stubborn devotion that only grows deeper with time.